You know me, always got to do a sound check real quick. Things seem to be in order. Alright, let's get some things started up here before I really jump into everything. Do I want to do the Paladin first? Yeah. You know what? Yeah, let's do it. Let's do the Paladin first. Okay. Give it a little bit of time. Maybe somebody will jump in. If not, we'll get started though. I'm already kind of late starting up the stream, so we'll see, but I'll give it a little bit of time. Guess I should say this if you guys are just joining. Welcome, welcome. If you catch this on the watch back, appreciate it. These are the last two healers that I have to break down. I did the priest and the mage in two separate streams. I gave Resto Shaman its own video because I originally was just going to do all of these in video format, and then streams just became easier. So we're going to do it in a stream setting. And I think, you know what? It's already 8 minutes past what I said I was starting. I want to try to be punctual. So let's start this up. So Holy Paladin. So Holy Paladin was, widely considered a very strong healer in Vanilla Classic and Season of Mastery in 2019, whatever you want to call it. And the runes that Paladins get, I think, just bolster the effectiveness of Paladins. Not just Holy, every Paladin, but really Holy as well, because Holy was probably really the one that was holding down most 40 mans, right? You probably did have, some guilds had, a ret to help, not a ret, I'm sorry, a prot to help out with ad control during, before pulls or after pulls, whatever you want to call it, as you're moving on from boss to boss. You probably had a prot paladin just to kind of help in the mix, but not really tank. You might have had a ret for whatever reason, right? I don't know. But Holy was really the one that was holding it down in terms of the paladin population. They were the ones, doing all the buffs, giving you the auras, so on and so forth, stealing cloth gear from the clothies, which, probably was not a fun time if you were a cloth wearer, but hey, it is what it is. But just like with those other videos, I'm going to start with the runes, then we're gonna get into some talent builds that I think might work, and yeah, then we'll move on to the Druid. So first things first, going with the runes, this is the chest slot. You would think I would have these memorized by now, but for Paladins, we have Aegis, Divine Storm, Horn of Lordaeron, and then Seal of the Martyr, or Seal of Martyrdom. And, pardon me, we can go ahead and ignore Aegis. That's really a tanking rune, so you don't have to worry about that one. And I would say you could probably ignore Seal of Martyrdom too. This is a DPS rune. Now, that's not to say I'm sure there are going to be some Paladins that, make a DPS build and they might incorporate Seal of Martyrdom, but just for traditional healing, like this, the roleless healing is what we're talking about, you can skip Seal of Martyrdom. Divine Storm is an interesting one because I think I had mentioned this in the Prot Paladin stream. It's interesting because it does do healing, right? Divine Storm heals 3 party members or raid members for 25% of the damage caused. The damage is, of course, based off of weapon damage. The problem with this rune for using it as Holy is I don't know of any one-handers that have high weapon damage, especially like caster one-handers. You know what I mean? There could be one. Like, I don't have, a Rolodex of all of the one-handers that Paladins can use in my head, but it's weird to say that this kind of is really the only way a paladin can AoE heal, kind of like heal more than 2 targets at once, because they do have access to beacon, which we'll get into. But this is kind of the only way a paladin can heal 3 or more people. It's kind of weird to say it like that, but yeah, I don't think there's any real weapons that you would use for the healing component of Divine Storm to really make this an ability that you want to use. So we're going to skip this for now. And then we have Horn of Lordaeron. So Horn of Lordaeron, which honestly is like a copy paste from Horn of Winter from Wrath Classic. It gives strength and agility to all party members within 30 yards. So not raid members, just party members. And it's exclusive with Blessing of Might. So one paladin will give Blessing of Might, one paladin will provide Horn of Lordaeron. Or actually, I don't think that's how that works. That might be, you can only have Horn of Lordaeron or Blessing of Might. I don't know. It's worded weirdly. So we'll see how that works out. I'm sure somebody in the stream or in the chat will correct me on how this really works. But all in all, it gives you strength and agility. And I would say it says it's exclusive with Blessing of Might. Blessing of Might, to my knowledge, gives attack power. I'd have to fill out this build real quick just to see when did you get Blessing of Might and what it does. But I don't, like, to me, Blessing of Might never gave strength or any main stat. Blessing of Might, here it is. Yeah, it gives attack power. So I don't know why that they would make that a thing. Maybe they didn't want paladins to be too strong with their buffs, but there you have it. But for the chest rune, I honestly think it's going to be Horn of Lordaeron, to be quite honest with you. Where it says exclusive with Blessing of Might, I take that as one paladin can give one at a time. Like, I can't give Might and Horn of Lordaeron. Almost said Horn of Winter, but I could be completely misreading that wrong. So we'll see. But I think for the baseline usefulness for Holy Paladins, Horn of Lordaeron is the one. Like, you're not going to use Aegis because you're not going to care about block value. You're not going to be, traditionally speaking, you're not going to be using Seal of Martyrdom because this is a DPS seal, and it does a lot of damage to you. Use 10% of your health, so that seems pretty risky in the wrong setting. So I think all in all, you're going to be using Horn of Lordaeron. It's pretty easy. For the hand slot, we have Beacon of Light, Crusader Strike, and Hand of Reckoning. So to be quite honest, you might think that Beacon of Light is the default, which it kind of is. Like, it kind of is the default. Beacon of Light is a staple Holy Paladin ability. It's in the game. It's been in the game since TBC, and it's still in the game. It's a very iconic Paladin talent, and it does exactly what you think it does. So one target becomes a beacon, and any heals that you do to a party or a raid member, 100% of the heal will heal the beacon. So you can effectively heal 2 people at one time. And this is probably going to be the baseline one, right? Unless you have multiple Holy Paladins. I don't know if you can have multiple beacons on someone in vanilla, because obviously we didn't have Beacon of Light in vanilla. They got introduced in TBC. So I would imagine that it works the same way that the TBC beacon worked, where you can have more than one beacon as long as it came from 2 different paladins. But I could be wrong. Blizzard could implement something kind of like with the exclusivity thing with Horn of Lordaeron, so we'll see. But for all intents and purposes, I'm going to assume that this Beacon of Light kind of operates similarly to the TBC version. And then we have Crusader Strike. So Crusader Strike does an instant attack, does 75% weapon damage, and generates 2% of your maximum mana. So that secondary part is why I think this will maybe get some play. Possibly if you have a plethora of paladins and Beacon is covered, 10 killings covered, you might see something like this, especially in like speed clears or something like that. Crusader Strike now in Dragonflight is a decent way to generate holy power, which is another resource that paladins get further along. But giving them maximum mana, this is more for rets, but I could see some holy paladin kind of trying to make use out of it. The only problem with that is you're losing Beacon of Light, so you're taking a pretty big hit for getting Crusader Strike and getting your 2% max mana. I personally think the right answer would be Beacon of Light for 95% of the time, but I'm sure there's going to be some paladins who are going to find out ways to utilize Crusader Strike. And then we have Hand of Reckoning. So Hand of Reckoning is the taunt, right? And I went over this in my prop paladin one. This is like a staple thing. Like, no matter where you go, no matter what iteration of vanilla you look at, the one meme that comes up is that prop paladins don't have a taunt, they can't tank. And I mean, it's really hard to tank without a taunt, especially when threat is such a big deal in the game, in vanilla anyway. So it's memed for a reason. The reason why I can see Holy Paladins making some kind of use out of this is if you think of a fight like the Four Horsemen that required a lot of taunting. So you needed a lot of warriors because not only did they have a taunt, but they had like a set bonus that increased the chance of their taunt hitting or reduced the cooldown of it, one or the other. It improved their taunt. And it was really, really hard to do that fight without a lot of taunts. Now, I don't know if Blizzard's going to implement another fight like that. I don't know if they're going to change the already existing 60-man or 60-man, 40-man Nax with Four Horsemen where you might not need as many taunts. Who knows? Only time will tell. But if there is a fight like that where you need a lot of taunts, instead of bringing a whole bunch of tanks, it might just be easier to swap out a rune, pick up a taunt what you need to, the tank taunts back, you move on with life. Could be a thing. But like I said, 95% of the time, you're probably just picking Beacon of Light. It's really strong. Not taking it is pretty tough to deal with. And then for the leg slot, we have a couple of things. We have Avenger Shield, Divine Sacrifice, Exorcist, and there's more. Exorcist, Inspiration, Exemplar, and Rebuke. So we're going to go ahead and cross out Avenger's Shield and probably Exorcist too, even though I could see this being run in speed clears. Just having Exorcist being able to hit anything and dealing 100% increased damage to undead and demons, that's a speed runner thing to me. Like if you have a lot of paladins, a lot of holy paladins, and they take Exorcist, they can contribute some damage. So this is like a speed runner thing to me. So I could see Exorcist being used. Divine Sacrifice is another thing that I talked about in the Prot 1 in the Prot stream, and Divine Sac is really what makes Paladins and Wrath Classic really strong. However, this version of Divine Sac only affects party members, not raid members, and you don't get the Divine Guardian talent to improve it. So really all you're doing with this Divine Sac is reducing your party members' damage by 30%, and it's getting redirected to you. Now with the Wrath talent, like I said, there's a talent called Divine Guardian, which when you have Divine Sacrifice active, the Paladin in question using it, also takes 20% reduced damage. That's not in this, obviously. Another thing with this Divine Sac is that you can't bubble sack it. Like you can't turn it on, reduce all the damage that your party takes by 30%, and immune it. Like as you can see here, Divine Sacrifice cannot be used while you're under the effects of Blessing of Protection, Divine Shield, Divine Protection. So you have to take the damage. You can't immune it, which honestly is an interesting choice because it's not really interesting, but it was staple for having Holy Paladins and Rep Paladins using Divine Stack, and if damage was going to be wild, they would just bubble, right? And there you go, you have a free raid CD. I'm guessing Blizzard wants to tone that down, and if it worked that way, like if the vanilla version of Divine Sack worked that way, it would kind of feel more like a retail thing, so I can understand them putting that restriction on there. Next one we have is Inspiration Exemplar. This is the Tremor Aura, if you want to call it that. Like, shamans have Tremor Totem. This is basically the same thing, just in aura form. So your inspiring presence periodically dispels the fear and sleep effects on all nearby party members. This will probably see some uses. Like, it's really good. It's not something that you have to, micromanage. You just kind of put the rune on and it goes. You don't have to worry about it falling off, to my knowledge anyway. Yeah, you don't have to worry about it falling off. It doesn't look like it overtakes any of the other existing auras like Devotion Aura or Concentration Aura. It might though. That's a change that they could do. So you got to pick when you can't have Devotion and Inspiration Exemplar up. I could see that being a balancing thing. But as of right now, there's no overlap. You can have this and one of your other auras up, and this is going to see some uses. And then the last one we have is Rebuke. Rebuke is the Paladin Interrupt. This is also probably going to see some uses if there are interrupt heavy fights. I don't know off the top of my head if there's a lot in vanilla. There might be some added for like Blackrock Depths or like the future, what's the one that they teased? Scarlet Monastery or Nomergon and stuff like that. But this is also a useful rune that can be used. But I think as a baseline, you're probably either going to go with the Inspiration Exemplar or the Divine Sac. Just depends. Like you could put a Holy Paladin inside the tank party and have them have that be used as kind of like a cooldown. So I can see that. So I would say these two are probably on equal footing. And I would probably say Inspiration is maybe the baseline one, but there's a strong call for Divine Sack. You know what? I'll say there's probably not a baseline, but these two are interchangeable. These two are interchangeable. For general play, I would just maybe go with that. But definitely interchangeable with Divine Sacrifice. And that's really it for the runes. Like, Holy, because it's sharing its runes with the other two specs, it's kind of straightforward, right? And because there are tanking runes and because there are retribution runes, there wasn't a lot of room for Holy specific runes. So it was kind of straightforward to kind of pick out which runes you want. I think the slot with the most swap potential is the legs, obviously. I think like you could have something going on with the hands, but Beacon, like I said, is too strong, and I think you just kind of always pick Horn of Lordaeron, to be honest. But that's it for the runes. Let's look at the talents. So Holy is known for getting a lot of the improved stuff, like you can get Kings, you can get improved Blessing of Might, you can get improved Devotion Aura. However, at the level 25 bracket, you might want to allocate your talent points a little more into the Holy tree. So what I'm going to do is, I already have 5 points in Divine Intellect. I'll put the other 5 in Spiritual Focus, and we still have a few left. We have about 6 left. So I think Healing Light is definitely one. I think Improved Lay on Hands is a really strong one. And then you have one more point. Now, generally speaking, you could put that point in Consecration. You could put that point in Unyielding Faith to give you a 5% chance to resist fear and disorient effects. But see, with this kind of gets diminished if you're running Inspiration Exemplar, because you're going to remove fear effects. So even if you get hit with the fear, right? Even if you get hit with a fear, like let's say Onyxia, she comes down, she does Bellowing Roar, you get hit. I would imagine that this Inspiration Exemplar rune is on the same tick rate as Tremor. So it's only going to last about 2 seconds. So you're going to break that fear relatively early. Obviously, fully resisting something is great, but I don't know if I waste a talent point to just get a 5% when I'm guaranteed to remove it. So I think this one loses some of its power because of Inspiration Exemplar. So I wouldn't put that talent point there. And disorient effects are kind of few and far between in vanilla. So even if you say, oh wait, you can resist disorient, like disorient's normally, like you normally got to be standing in something bad for you to get disoriented. Like you took a dragon breath the wrong way. Like disorients are a few. You don't have to worry about that one. So I think for base, you can put that point in Consecration. You can put that point in Improved Blessing of Wisdom. You can put the point, if you want 1 point for a little bit more armor, you can put it in Devotion. You can put for a little bit of a stronger Blessing of Might, you can put it in there. I think personally the best point for this is probably either going to go into Improved Blessing of Wisdom or Illumination. Improved Blessing of Wisdom is going to increase the effect of Blessing of Wisdom by 10%, really strong effect. Getting a point in Illumination allows your critical strikes to give a 20% chance to give mana back. Depending on how mana restrictive or mana strained Holy is at level 25, only time will tell. If we're swimming in mana, you can scrap Illumination, go straight into Blessing of Wisdom. Or if you just want to add some extra damage, you can go for Consecration. I always kind of looked at, for Holy anyway, I always kind of looked at Consecration as a means to get down the tree, right? Because this talent point is better than putting it in Unyielding Faith or putting it in Improved Seal or putting it in Divine Strength. So I kind of looked at this as just, it only costs 1, and you get a strong ability. So I always kind of looked at Consecration like that for Holy, but seeing as how we have access to Improved Blessing of Wisdom, I think you can. And not for nothing, Consecration is probably going to do some decent damage. I wouldn't say it's something that you can use on cooldown. It does cost a lot of mana, and like I said before, if we are mana starved or mana hungry, it might not be the best move to use Consecration a lot. So I think just for natural play, that last talent point should go into Improved Blessing of Wisdom. Now, there are a couple of things you can do to kind of mix things up if you really want to be like the buff boy or buff girl. I'll straight up say this. I think it takes too much of a talent point investment to get to Improved Blessing of Kings. So if we look at it, if I clear this, if you take Improved Devotion Aura, pardon me, and let's say you take the Improved Hit Chance and Guardian's Favor just to get there. So we've already invested most of our talent points. That's 11 talent points, 11 talent points just to get to kings, which means we only have 5 talent points left. So you could get the divine intellect one, which is great. Increasing your intellect by 10% is good. Increases your mana pool, so on and so forth. But you miss out on the spell pushback protection. You miss out on healing light, increasing the amount healed by holy and flash of light. So I don't know if kings is worth missing out on these 2 talents, in my opinion. Because especially as a hard caster, right? Like, you don't have holy shock yet, so you don't have any instant cast that heal anyway. So missing out on spiritual focus is kind of spooky, especially for a lot of talents that you're not really going to care about. Like, the hit talent is okay, but you're not really going to be attacking anything. So I don't know. I think this is a big order just to get to kings. Kings is a strong buff, don't get me wrong, but I feel like at the first level bracket, it's just too much of our total talent points for us to get kings. The same can kind of be said for improved blessing of might, but I'll say this: at least improved blessing of might is on the first tier, so you only have to invest 5 talent points, and then you can take the others and you can put it right here, and you still have that 1 floating talent point. If this is the case, I'd probably say you probably want to put it in healing light just to get a 4% increase. However, if you want to put it in improved lay on hands, that's not bad either. I think lay on hands is a slept on cooldown because it's such a long cooldown. People don't really think about it, but reading what improved lay on hands does, giving 15% bonus armor to a tank for 2 minutes is really, really strong. It's really, really strong. So that's why I think improved lay on hands gets kind of slept on, and I think lay on hands in general just gets slept on. But if you do want to provide, if you have no other paladin who can take improved blessing of might, and you do want to provide it, this is kind of something you can do. You can put 5 points here, and then you can continue on down into the holy tree. But I would say, just to make things a lot easier and make yourself a lot more effective, this is probably the setup that you could do. You could also, obviously, you could take that talent point and you can put it into consecration. And that's really it for the paladin. The paladin, honestly, is pretty, like holding anyway, is pretty, like, for lack of a better term, rigid when it comes to its talent points because it's so early, right? So a lot of the early talent points, at least for the holy tree, or not for the holy tree, for the other trees, don't really lend power to your hybridity power. So, I mean, blessing of might is one. You could say that. And improved devotional is okay. It's just a weak talent to take if you're not holy. So it's okay. But you could treat improved devotion or the same way you treated improved blessing of might, where you could put the 5 talent points here. You can go back into the holy tree, get divine intellect, get spiritual focus, and put your last floating talent point into really any one of these things. But I think for just general play, this is probably going to be a build that you use or something similar. Everybody's different. Everyone's going to come up with their own thing. This is something that I would use, I guess. But that's really it for the Paladin. So let's move on to the Druid. I have it up here. Boop. Druid. So Druid, much like Paladin, also is a hybrid class that has a lot of runes to share the similar slots between, the 3 specs. Really kind of 4. 3.5 really. 3.5 because Feral Combat really is a tanking and a DPS build a talent into one. So it's like 3.5 until Feral Tanking becomes Guardian. So let's look at the runes, starting with the chest. We have Furious Storm Rage, Living Seed, Survival of the Fittest, and Wild Strikes. I think we can kind of ignore Survival of the Fittest unless you're PvPing, right? If you're PvPing, then this is probably something that you would consider taking, reducing your chance to be critically hit and reducing all damage taken by 10%. It's pretty strong for a healer, passively. And when you shift into bear form, you get 10% more. So you really become kind of unkillable in a PvP format. But for PvE play, for traditional play, you can kind of ignore Survival of the Fittest. And then that leaves the other 3. So Living Seed is the one that probably sounds like the most Resto-centric, and it is. When you critically heal your target with any healing spell, you plant the Living Seed on the target to be healed when the target is attacked. Pretty good. Now, note that this says any healing spell. I'm pretty sure on Wrath when this talent got introduced, this only became a thing with direct healing spells like Healing Touch and Regrowth. So the fact that it works with your Swift Mend, with your Rejuve, or I'm assuming that it works with those because it does say any healing spell, kind of crazy. So I do like that, and it makes Resto a little bit of a stronger single target heal. It gives them kind of a little boost for giving them like a single target, one use, one. It's like a single charge Prayer of Mending. We'll call it like that. But Living Seed would be the first option that you would overlook, and then you have Wild Strikes. So Wild Strikes is something that you can ignore. Once again, you're Resto. You have to be in cat form or bear form, so you're not going to really be able to utilize Wild Strikes. If this didn't have the form requirement attached to it, then I could definitely see this getting some play. If Druids could just naturally give an aura of Wind Fury, this would see some play as Resto. But because you have to be in one of the animal forms, ignore it. I should have said that in the beginning. Ignore Survival of the Fittest unless you're PvPing. Ignore Wild Strikes. Then we have the Fury of Storm Rage. So this one reduces the mana cost of Wrath by 100%. And each time you do damage, you have a 12% chance for your next cast of Healing Touch to be instant. So this one is like speedrunner heaven because it removes the mana cost. You get free Wraths, and you have a 12% chance to make your Healing Touch free. So it does have some healing benefit too. For traditional play, if you're like new to Resto Druid, or you're just learning, or you're, maybe if you're not even new, if you're just, healer focused, maybe this doesn't see some play for you, but I could definitely see this being in rotation because it makes Wrath free and you get instant healing touches. This is definitely going to be speedrunner rune. But for traditional play, I think Living Seed is the one. But you can definitely swap Fury of Storm Rage. For the hand slot, we have Lacerate, Mangle, Sunfire, and Wild Growth. I'm going to be honest here. You can ignore Lacerate. You can ignore Mangle. You can kind of ignore Sunfire. This is another one that I think is speedrunner-centric, where you want to add more damage, and you're just trying to get it anywhere you can, and Healers obviously is a slot where you can get more damage because they're not traditionally doing damage. But for healing, Wild Growth. Like, Wild Growth is such a strong ability. And if you look at it, so it heals all of the target player's party members. So it's not raid, it's not a smart heal raid, it's for just party. Within 40 yards, the heal is applied quickly and then it slows down. So basically, it gives you a really fast ticking hot. It starts really fast in the beginning, slows down as the duration goes away. And Wild Growth is the only way a Druid can heal multiple targets at once off of one GCD. So it's an AoE heal. It's a pretty strong AoE heal. And if we scroll down here, let me double check. It does have a 6-second cooldown, so it's not the Wrath version. I'm pretty sure the Wrath version doesn't have a cooldown, but it's still a strong ability, and I think it's the one that you're gonna take hands down. Like I said, Sunfire can be the speedrunner one, but losing Wild Growth just to get Sunfire, I don't know, seems kind of iffy to me. Pardon me. So I think Wild Growth is the one here, but I could see Sunfire having play. Mangle and Lacerate, unless you're really like cat weaving, and there's no other person who can put this Mangle debuff up, you can ignore these two. And then for the final slot, the legs, we have Life Bloom, Savage Roar, Skull Bash, and Star Surge. So Life Bloom is one of the Resto Druid stable abilities, but note that Life Bloom doesn't just give you the spell Life Bloom. It also does something to your other abilities. So it reduces the global cooldown on your Rejuvenation and your Life Bloom by half a second. That's a lot. Reducing the GCD on Rejuvenation is really, really good. So this sentence, the first part alone makes Life Bloom like a 90% choice in my pick. And then when you actually use the ability of Life Bloom, you can it puts a hot on person. And when Life Bloom is either dispelled or it completes its duration, it blooms, healing for a large amount and giving the Druid half of the cost back. And Life Bloom can stack 3 times. So Life Bloom is a really strong, really powerful healing ability. But the fact that it reduces the GCD for Rejuve is almost, for me, enough to just pick it by default. Now, for the other runes, you can ignore Savage Roar again, unless you're kitty weaving, you're a kitty weaving Resto Druid and you're putting up them numbers, you can pretty much ignore Savage Roar. Skull Bash is an interrupt. Might see some niche uses if you need the extra interrupt and there's no one else who can bring it. Sure, Skull Bash is there. And then you have Star Surge. Star Surge is another one that is like a speedrunner thing where you can kind of just take it and you can cast out some free damage. Well, not free because it still has a mana cost, but you can cast out some damage from the healer side and get some extra damage from your raid group. But again, you're giving up Life Bloom. Now, trading Life Bloom for Star Surge in itself isn't, it's kind of a fair trade, kind of. But the fact, again, that you're reducing the GCD of your Rejuve, to me, makes me want to pick Life Bloom. It's like getting a whole bunch of haste, right? So I think Life Bloom kind of is the default pick here. Although I will say you can probably interchange Skull Bash when needed and very niche speedrunner stuff if you want to pick Star Surge. So this is the 3 runes. Again, Resto Druid is kind of like Holy Paladin. Because you're sharing runes and rune slots with the other specs, you kind of don't have a lot of room to just add a whole bunch of Resto runes for flexibility. So you kind of just got to pick with the one that looks good. And then going into the talent. So when I was looking at this before I started the stream, I was like, yo, Resto doesn't really have any great early talents in my opinion. Like the improved Mark of the Wild is pretty good. I'll give it that. But to me, improved Rage is, obviously for Feral Druids. Nature's Focus, giving you a 70% avoidance chance on your Healing Touch, your Regrowth, and your Trank. So you don't really use Trank, right? You don't really use Trank. Healing Touch is also not a spell that you really use unless you're using that, and if you are using this Fury of the Storm Rage thing, you're probably really not going to use Healing Touch because you're just going to be waiting for the free Healing Touch procs. And then for Regrowth, so for Regrowth, it's not bad. Regrowth is a spell that you do use. It's like the equivalent of a flash heal or a flash of light for Resto Druid. It's a fast spell. It's not cost effective, but it's a fast spell that heals the tank and then puts a hot on them. So if you want the spell pushback for Regrowth alone, I would say sure. I guess you could warrant that, and you need the points anyway to get down the tree. So you could definitely do that. But for the other 2 spells, for Healing Touch and Tranquility, it's probably not the best. You might get some use out of Tranquility. Tranquility can be a good emergency heal. The problem is it only heals the party, and generally speaking, Resto Druids aren't really put in parties for Trank usage. So we'll see. And then we have Improved Healing Touch. Again, Healing Touch isn't, the most used Resto Druid ability. So in my opinion, you don't really need to put talent points here. I know traditionally speaking, you would put talent points in Improved Healing Touch as a means to get it further down the tree, right? But for the level 25 bracket, I don't know if this is something that you need as a Resto Druid. So what I would do is maybe forego this, depending on how we're using these spells, right? A Resto Druid's job, more than likely in a raid group, is just to blanket heal, right? Rejuve, maybe keep Regrowth on the tank, but basically, and maybe spend your Swift Mins on the tank or anybody who's taking priority damage. But you're blanket healing, keeping the healing consistent. And because you're not really using Healing Touch and a lot of your spells are instant, it makes you a lot more mobile. This kind of bogs you down. And there are other talent points that you can spend. So going into the 3rd tier, we do have Reflection. This is the Druid form of the meditation talent, where it allows a percentage of your mana to continue generation while casting, in this case 15%. This is the talent that allows Resto Druids to utilize Spirit. Because Rejuvenation is their most efficient heal, and it's instant, they can cast it on the move, and it won't affect their mana return by much. And now that they have access to Life Bloom and Wild Growth, both of which are instant, it only makes this talent even more powerful. So Reflection is definitely something that you want to take. Insect Swarm is a utility talent in my opinion. So it puts a swarm on the enemy target, and it reduces their chance to hit by 2%. That debuff is pretty strong, especially when you're talking about reducing the damage that tanks take, because if the enemy has, if a boss mob has a 2% uh, a decreased chance to hit by 2%. It's pretty big, especially in the early stages of gearing up, where tanks might be taking a little bit more damage. Maybe your tank doesn't have full pre-raid yet, and he needs the extra boost. I could see some uses for Insect Swarm, and it lasts 12 seconds, so it's not a long duration, but it's not a short one either. It's a pretty decent duration that you can kind of keep up if your mana is right, but it's there if necessary. And then we have Subtlety, which reduces the threat of your healing spells. So Resto Druids are kind of notorious for having a lot of healer threat, and it's even worse when there are bosses that spawn ads that might be not in immediate reach of the tank as they're spawning. Because Resto Druids have instant cast spells and they're just blanketing everybody and they're throwing out their Rejuves left and right, and now they're going to be throwing out Wild Growths and Life Blooms, Resto Druid threat might be a thing. And Resto Druid is probably the only healer that I would, consider using a threat reduction talent on because of the nature of Resto Druid. You could literally have a Resto Druid pull all of the whelps on Onyxia. I know I keep using Onyxia as an example, but I think it's a staple fight for vanilla that I think everyone can kind of picture in their head. But you can literally pull all the whelps as a Resto Druid just by general play before the tank even gets there, and you'd have a lot of threat. And if, let's say as an example, you're pulling threat, you're healing the fight, you're healing the fight, Onyxia flies in the air, whelp spawn, the big Drac guard, the Draco guards, whatever they're called, they spawn, and you're still blanketing the raid because you're healing the fireballs that are getting lobbed at you from Onyxia. But tank can't make it to the Dragon Guard. Tank can't make it to the whelps in time, and now they're swarming you. This talent can kind of help with that. So for the last 2 talent points, you could put it in Subtlety to reduce the threat generated by 8%, and that would put you at the 25 bracket. I think the only discrepancy here is whether or not to take and make time for Improved Healing Touch. If you're using Fury of Storm Rage, I think you can completely skip this talent. If you're using Living Seed, because Living Seed also works with any heal. See, if it worked with just Regrowth and Healing Touch like what it does in later iterations of Living Seed, I would say, all right, this is probably a point where you want to use Healing Touch because you might cast it, you might get lucky with a Living Seed proc. If you're tank healing, Healing Touch can be a pretty substantial heal. But if you're the only Resto Druid, which is not a far-fetched thing because most guilds only have like 1, maybe 2 Resto Druids, but 1 is pretty much the quota for Resto Druid. If you're the 1 Resto Druid, chances are you're not going to be assigned to tank healing. I'm just going to keep it honest with you. So having Improved Healing Touch at the level 25 bracket probably is not the biggest thing. Now, I will say this. Once the level caps open up, and the level caps increases and we get more runes and we get more talent points, you're definitely going to take Healing Touch because it's a means to get to Nature's Swiftness, which is a pretty powerful cooldown. So in the future, you're going to probably put these 5 talent points in here to get to Nature's Swiftness. But because we can't access Nature's Swiftness, I don't think you need Improved Healing Touch, to be quite honest. I think the talent points, putting them in Reflection is a no-brainer. Putting them in Insect Swarm only just really helps out the tank, and reducing your threat will maybe save you. But if you don't want to put them in these talents, let's say you say, you know what, I don't need this, I don't need these 2 things, right? Or there's another Druid who's all over Insect Swarm, right? You could, and again, I'm going to talk to the min-maxi damage boys / speedrunners. You could take your 3 talent points, pardon me, and put them in Improved Wrath, right? This combined with Furious Storm Rage will net you some damage. Free rats that also get a reduced cast time, not a bad call. This is very niche, and in my personal opinion, I think you're better off taking your 3 talent points and keeping them in the Resto tree. Just my personal opinion, but you could do this. You could also put it in Nature's Grasp. Oh, not 4. There we go. You could also put it in Nature's Grasp. However, Nature's Grasp is only usable outdoors. So if you're in a raid instance or in a dungeon instance and it's not considered an outdoor place, Nature's Grasp has, a very limited scope on what it's used. So while you can do this, I think it's just better practice to put it and keep these talents in the restoration tree. And I think Insect Swarm is a free talent, and I also think Subtlety is a free talent. Now, one last thing you could do with this is, let's say you're really trying to get down this tree. You could put one talent point here, and you can put one talent point into improved rejuvenation. And if you're running Life Bloom, I think this talent gets a lot of value because remember your GCD for Rejuve is reduced by half a second, which means you're going to be able to get more rejuvenations out, which means increasing the effectiveness by 5% is a pretty big deal in my opinion. So this is also a route that you could take, and probably one that might get recommended on guides. So this is also a route that you could take. It's a shame that you can't get to improve rejuvenation before you spend that last talent point here. That's a shame, but it is what it is. As far as Tranquil Spirit, it reduces the mana cost of Healing Touch and Tranquility. It's two spells that you don't really use anyway, so I don't think you need Tranquil Spirit. Now, while I'm saying this, I could be completely wrong. Watch at the level 25 bracket. Watch people just straight up use Healing Touch all the time, right? That could be a thing. I don't think it's going to be a thing, but it would be kind of funny and ironic if that was general Resto Druid play, just to use Healing Touch. But yeah, I think getting down to improve rejuvenation at the risk of not having that extra 4% threat generation reduced, I think that's fine. I think the trade-off here is fine. 5% increase on rejuve on your most efficient spell isn't bad. And I think that's really it for the Resto Druid. So the reason why I picked Resto Druid and Holy Paladin to do at the same time was because they're kind of like two sides of the same coin. They're both pretty rigid in their rune and talent setups. They do have some flexibility, but they don't have as much flexibility, in my opinion, as like other healers. You kind of got to pick you kind of got to take what you can get, and the other trees don't really offer anything early on to say, yo, I want that as a healer. So I think as a Resto Druid goes, you can kind of get this. Like, I mean, the balance tree kind of does that. You can get like the 5 points and improve Market of Wild, and then go straight into the balance tree and try to get to like let's do it here real quick. Let me see. Do 5. We'll do Wrath just for shenanigans, and we'll do this. So this can be a thing. This is Omen of Clarity. So Omen of Clarity is an ability that is a buff, really. It's a 10-minute buff that you put on yourself, and while you're either casting spells or attacking, you have a chance to reduce the next cast of your spells that cost mana, rage, or energy to be free. And this comes at the cost of not being able to regenerate mana while casting. So it kind of diminishes the value of spirit for you. You really have to pick MP5 gear. But you get a couple of free casts. So this could also be a thing that you could use. It doesn't take too much to really get to. You do kind of have to waste 5 talent points to get natural weapons. Natural weapons doesn't do anything for Resto because it's increasing physical damage while in your forms. You're not going to be meleeing anything as a healer unless you're like kitty weaving. If you're kitty weaving, then natural weapons is a godsend, right? But this is also a thing that you can do. You can definitely pick up Omen of Clarity. If you don't want to take Omen of Clarity, you can definitely pick up Improved Thorns to give a more powerful Thorns buff. Like, there are things that you can do in the balance tree that does provide some personal utility, but it does come at a cost. So while I will say this is pretty viable, getting Improved Thorns, getting Omen of Clarity, even looking into Nature's Reach to increase the range of some of your spells. Although Nature's Reach doesn't work with your healing spells. Well, Rejuvenation, which is the important one. So I would probably say no to Nature's Reach, but Omen of Clarity is a pretty good talent, and so is Improved Thorn. So this can be a thing. But like I said, for traditional healing on a Resto Druid, it does come at a cost for really investing 10 points to get to one talent, where you're now missing out on the pushback protection for regrowth and the mana regeneration from reflection. And keep in mind, you can still build in a way where you can get improved rejuvenation for 5% increased rejuve healing. So while both may see some play, I think this is the build that I would use if I was a Resto Druid at the level 25 bracket. And that's really it for the Resto Druid. I think the next stream I do is a tier list, figuring out what, speculatively, of course, not definitively, just speculation, what would be the best healer, what I think will be maybe the best healer, or an S tier or an A tier healer for Season of Discovery. Just like how I did with the tanks, we're going to go through them all again. I'm going to break out the tier list, and we're going to tier them up and give reasoning as to why I tier certain things certain ways. Once the tier list is done, I did make a promise to some people that I would look at Hunter as I guess, the start of my DPS breakdowns. I never really intended on doing breakdowns for DPS, but Hunter keeps coming up, so I'm going to look at Hunter. Warrior's kind of come up too. Warrior has come up a couple of times, but Hunter keeps coming up, so I might take a look at it. But yeah, the tier list for healers is definitely coming up. And like I said yesterday in my stream, I'm going to try to do some form of content every day leading up to the Season of Discovery launch. I'm going to do my best. Hopefully I make it. If I don't, I'll definitely put up a community post or something. But yeah, this was fun. I think all of the healers are in a pretty good spot. I think they all each got their own powerful runes in a way to make them all competitive, because like I said before, Resto Druid you only really kind of brought one in vanilla. It was kind of like the redheaded stepchild, whereas like you really only bought it for combat res, and I don't even know if they get that at the, yeah, they do, they get it at 20. Okay, yeah, you kind of brought it for a combat res, but that was really in blanket healing, but it really wasn't, it didn't really take off until later expansion. So I'm glad to see Resto Druid getting some of the power that it deserves in vanilla, because it is kind of one of my favorite healers. So I'm happy to see it get the look. But that's really it for the Resto Druid Holy Paladin stream. Let me think. As far as a time frame for when the tier list comes, I can probably make it happen tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then on reset we'll do a tier list. But that's what's coming next, the healer tier list. So if you join me on the live, I appreciate it. If you join me on the watch back and you review this, also appreciate it. If you like what you see, please consider liking and subscribing. I'm trying to make it to 1,000 before the end of the year. I don't know if it's going to happen, but it would be great if it did. Only time will tell. Other than that, you guys have been great. I've been Soul, and I'm out. Peace.